Hi there, Richard Fulmer here, and welcome to another Richard's Rock Rambles. So for the past while now, we've been looking at albums that are 50 years old in 2022. So what I thought we'd do now is move away from that for a while for the next bunch of videos and have a look at some Sophomore albums, the all-important second album. And sometimes this can become a difficult album, especially if your first album has done really well. And in some cases, has almost gone on to be an iconic album, which means that your second album has got to be as good, if not better, than your first big hit that came along. And I mean, how many bands have a debut album that's a big hit? When you do, you got to follow it up. Conversely, if your first album totally bombed and nobody bought it except your family, then your second album becomes just as important because it has to do something that obviously the first one didn't. So that's the conundrum of the second album. But some artists and bands have managed to weather the storm and have released as good a, sometimes even better album for their second opus. So that's what we're going to have a look at for the next couple of videos going forward. The all-important second album. And the first one we're going to have a look at today is the second album by Neil Young. Now, of course, Neil Young's discography is massive. I mean, the guy releases an album just about every 5 minutes. He's like Bob Dylan. It never ends. But for me, his second album was really his first. His first album did okay. It didn't make any great shakes. It wasn't that fantastic. But the second album was the first time that he hooked up with Crazy Horse, the guys that he'd make a lot of albums with. In fact, his most recent album, Barn, also still features some of the guys from Crazy Horse. And they work so well together. I am a Neil Young fan, but I tend to gravitate more towards the electric side of Neil Young as opposed to the acoustic, which I enjoy as well. It just depends what mood I'm in. But I really enjoy the gnarly electric side of Neil Young. You know, when he gets really dirty with that guitar sound of his, that old Blackie Gibson Les Paul that he plays. And that's kind of the sound you get with this second album. So the one we're talking about is Everyone Knows This Is Nowhere. That was his second album. And it was recorded between January and March 1969 at the Wally Heider Studio 3 in Hollywood. And it was released on May the 14th, 1969. 1969 and 1970, amazing years for rock. So much was happening. Obviously, you had all the big festivals. In 1970, you had Isle of Wight. 69, you had Woodstock. Plus, you had all these great albums coming out. So the guys back then were seriously spoiled. It was produced by Neil Young and David Briggs, and I think David Briggs would go on to do quite a few albums with Neil Young. And it was the first, as I said, the first recording with long-time backing band Crazy Horse. And they just added something extra to Neil Young's, the whole sound that he had. So in the band, you had Neil Young on guitar, lead vocals, Danny Whitten on guitar and harmony vocals. Unfortunately, Danny Whitten would lose his battle with drugs in the end, and that was another story. Billy Talbot on bass guitar and Ralph Molina on drums and harmony vocals. So you had two guys doing harmony vocals just to give a bit of extra heft to Neil Young's vocals as well, which is always cool. So the album went platinum in the States, and the single from the album was the great track Cinnamon Girl, one of my favorite Neil Young's. So this was the first album, simply entitled Neil Young, with that cool cover. And, there wasn't really much on here that you could say was fantastic. I've Been Waiting for You. I've Loved Her So Long. It really, I think it was Neil finding his feet. And, that happens sometimes with debut albums. You're not quite sure which direction you want to go, and you're not always happy with the production, etc., etc. And I think that was the case with this album. It's not bad, but it's not one of my top Neil Youngs. But then came along Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. That's Neil with his dog there. Quite a cool cover, I thought, with his trademark lumberjack shirt, which he'd be gone to wear right up until today. It became like a Neil Young thing. So the tracks on here, Cinnamon Girl, that was the first hit. I just love that gnarly guitar that he gets on that track. And there you can hear the great marriage with him and the guys from Crazy Horse. Then there's the title track. Everybody knows this is Nowhere. Also a really cool track. Round and Round. And then you get the epic Down by the River. Now that track, if you listen to the lyrics, it's not a very happy song. It's quite dark. Going down to the river and he shot his baby, killed his girlfriend. A very kind of intense lyrics, but such a cool track. It's got like different parts to it as well. And some great lead guitar work from Neil. And one of my standout tracks on the album, Down by the River. Then it's The Losing End, When You're On. Running Dry, Requiem for the Rockets. The Rockets was a band that he used to play with. And the other big hit from the album, or quite a cool song from the album, is Cargill in the Sand. Also a lengthy track. There's some quite long tracks on here. Cargill in the Sand is 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Down by the River is 9 minutes. So you get your money's worth with this album. And it's got different parts to it. It's really interesting. Great writing. Obviously, Neil Young, one of the best songwriters of all time. And even here in the early days, you could see he had a long way to go. And of course, he would go on to do stuff with Crosby, Stills and Nash and have a massive solo career. Neil Young never stuck into one particular style. He would veer into all sorts of directions, sometimes at the record company pulling their hair out because he wouldn't do what they wanted him to. But Neil never followed trends. He made trends. So yeah, if you haven't got this in your collection, the second album from Neil Young, I would advise you to get it. It's a great listen, and there are some standout tracks on here. There's about 3 or 4 really great tracks that became staples and that Neil Young would have to play in his set list for many years, right up until today, I would imagine. So there we go. That's our first episode in great second albums, the Sophomore albums. As I said, it becomes a really important album if you had a great first album or if your first album bombed. And I think that worked for Neil Young. Next time round, we're going to have a look at an American band who had a huge debut album. It became an iconic album. So that could have become an albatross around their neck. But with their second album, simply entitled Van Halen 2, they got it right. And they carried on where they started off. So I'll catch you guys then. Have yourselves a great week. Look after yourselves. And I'll catch you soon. Cheers.